Okay, just about ready to get started. Yes, we're ready to get started. What we were talking about um, last week um, is that we were commenting on a Mishnah where Rabbi Gamliel was mourning over his servant Tavi. And there were two things that the Mishnah or that the Gemara wanted to extract from there. Number one, as the Mishnah had stated, Tavi was different from other servants. Normally, a servant is considered to be one's chattel, and therefore is not even treated as a full, I guess, what you would call a human being. But I mean, you have to treat him with humanity. But at the same time, your interaction with him, your social interaction with him, is not in the same way that you would interact with a free person, a liberated person. So that was one reason why the Mishnah had questioned, or the students had questioned, why should you be mourning for him? But secondarily, the Gemara had inferred that if Tavi had been a free man, then even though Rabbi Gamliel and Tavi were not related, it seems that it would have been okay for for a person to sit shiva for someone who's a non-relative. And that too was surprising to the Gemara. And the Gemara had really concluded that if someone is very, very close to you, let's say a teacher has a student who's very, very close, that he feels very close to, then the teacher can mourn for the student. And, also vice versa, a student can sit shiva for a rebbe as well. So we had seen a story, which will just back up on its Chavtes Amid Beis, and it's let's see, where Kad Damach Rebichi, it's the second wide line on Chavtes Amid Beis. That Kad Damach Rebichia Bar Ada Bar Achte de Bar Kapara, that when Rebichia Bar Ada passed away, Kabil Reish Lakish Iluye Dahavar Rabbe. Reish Lakish accepted consolation, meaning that he comported himself as a mourner because he was his Rebbe. So Neima Talmidei de Barnasha Chaviv Kivrei. We can infer from this that a student is as beloved to a teacher as his own son. And so what we saw from there is anyone that is considered like your son, you have very, very close kinship to that person, then you can accept consolation for him. And that was why Rabbi Gamliel felt it appropriate to sit shiva, to be a mourner for Tabi, his student.
Can we do
Now,
that elsewhere? That if you teach someone Torah, it's like your parent?
yes, there is such a concept that the Gemara in Bava Metzia does say that if you teach someone Torah, it's as if you gave birth to them. And I think it's other places as well. So all the iftar iluye. So now that the Gemara talked about this story about Reish Lakish's student that Reish Lakish was mourning over, so now the Gemara discusses in more detail what Reish Lakish did at his hesped. Reish Lakish gave a hesped for this Talmud Reb Chia, and here's the words of the hesped, and this is beautiful Gemara today. Dodi yarad legano la'arugos habosem liros baganim vililkot shoshanim. The whole pasuk in Shir Hashirim says, "My beloved went down to his garden, to the rows of spice, of the very fragrant plants, liros baganim, to see the gardens, vililkot shoshanim, and to pick the roses." Okay, that's the whole pasuk. Now, Reish Lakish expounded on this and said, "Lo tzorcha ela dodi yarad legano lirot begano." So really, the pasuk should have been consistent. When it says, "My beloved went down to the garden," why then does it change from garden in the singular to gardens in the plural? It should have said, "My beloved went down to the garden, to the rows of spice, to see the garden," or liros really means to tend, not really see, to liros baganim, to tend to the gardens. Why is it changing to the plural? So Dodi Zeh HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So as we know, my beloved in Shir Hashirim refers to God himself. Yorad Legano Zeh Ha'olam. When it says that he went down to his garden, it's referring to the world in general. And La Arugos Habosim Elu Yisrael, to the rows of fragrant plants, that refers to the Jewish people. And Liros Baganim, but then it says that my beloved also went to tend to the gardens, so that refers to Elu Umos Ha'olam. That refers to the other nations of the world. Ve lilkot shoshanim elu hatzadikim shemisalkan mibenehem. And when it talks about that he went to pick the roses from the gardens, that refers to the righteous of Israel. That sometimes God has to go down into the garden and pull the most special flowers out of the garden, meaning he takes the tzaddikim out of this world. So the Gemara is now going to, and Reish Lakish is expanding on this. And mashlu mashal, lamaha davar domeh. What is this analogous to? Lamelech shahaya lo bein. This can be compared to a king who had a son. V'hayachaviv alav yoter midai. And the son was so beloved, was extremely beloved to the king. Me'asa hamelech natalo pardes. What did the king do for his beloved son? He planted him a special orchard. B'shah shahaya haben oser ritzano shel aviv. And whenever the son was obedient to his father and did something that pleased his father, haya mechazer b'chol ha'olam kulo v'ro'eh ezo nitiya yafeh ba'olam. The king, the father, would go all over the world to try to find the most exotic and beautiful plants that he could bring for his son's orchard. And vinota b'toch pardeso, and he would bring those plants and bring them to his son's orchard. Uveshasha hayamach iso hayamekatzeitz kol nitiotav. But when the son got the father upset, then the father would pull out the plants out of the garden. Kach b'shasha Yisrael osin ritzano shel makom. So now let's explain the nimshal. What is the idea? That when the Jewish people fulfill the will of Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu mechazer b'chol ha'olam kulo, v'ro'eh ezet tzadik be'umot ha'olam. God goes throughout the world, meaning among the other nations of the world, and he says, let me see who I can find, who is a beautiful plant, but is not Jewish, and transplant that individual among the Jewish people. Umevio umidabko liYisrael. And that he brings that holy person that's not Jewish and attaches them to the Jewish people.
So there's a Gan Eden for non-Jews and Jews?
We're not talking about Gan Eden.
What are we talking
We're
about?
not, no, we're talking about this world, Hal.
Oh, this one.
Yeah, this is all a metaphor. This is a metaphor. God looks for holy souls among the other nations and causes people who are not Jewish to convert to Judaism. And he takes these beautiful neshamas and he says, these are holy souls. Let me take them and attach them to the Jewish people. That's how non-Jews convert to Judaism. Okay? Umeviu umedabko liYisrael. And he brings them and attaches them to Israel. Kigon Yitro v'Rachav. Such examples of this are Yisro, who was Moshe's father-in-law, who was a convert, and Rachav Hazona, Rachav, who married Yehoshua. She was the matron of the people of Yericho, right? Uvishah shehein machisen oso, and when the Jewish people anger God because our behavior is not correct, hayemisale katzadikim shebenehem, then God pulls out the righteous of Israel from among the garden of Israel. So there's two things that are going on that are not connected at all. When the Jewish people please Hashem, then how does Hashem reward Bnei Yisrael? He brings them beautiful gerim and attaches them to the Jewish people, which is an amazing idea. Okay, in other words, when Hashem wants to show the Jewish people how much he loves them, he brings them converts who are holy people. And when Hashem is upset with the Jewish people, he takes away the tzaddikim of Israel. Not, he doesn't take those converts. He takes the tzaddikim of Israel. Those are the shoshanim. Those are the roses. And he removes them from this world. In other words, sometimes a tzaddik has to depart for the sake of atoning for the rest of Klal Yisrael. And this is how he was giving a hesped for his beloved student. Apparently, the student was not old. If Reish Lakish was his Rebbe and was giving a hesped for his student, so he was saying that, he didn't die for his own sins. He died because Hashem was upset with Am Yisrael. Now, the Gemara now continues and offers a similar idea about the righteous who pass away from this world. Dalema Rebbe Chia bar Abba v'chavurte, he says there once was a story of Rebbe Chia bar Abba and his group of students. V'is demarin Rebbe Yossi b'Rebbe Chalafta v'chavurte. Some say that it was not Rebbe Chia, but Rebbe Yossi b'Rebbe Chalafta and his students. V'is demarin Rebbe Akiva v'chavurte. And some say that was actually Rebbe Akiva and his students. Havu Yasvin lo'e be'eraisa techos chadateina. They were sitting to study Torah under a certain fig tree. Now, let's just be clear. In Eretz Yisrael, there may not have been that many places where a Rebbe could go with his students on a hot summer day to go and study Torah. So maybe it was hot and they didn't want to stay inside. And so they would go every day and they would sit under this beautiful fig tree that they had found. And let's say Rebbe Akiva was the person in question, and he would sit with his students and he would teach them Torah underneath the fig tree. V'havamara de te'enasa, karitz v'lakid le b'chol yom. But they also noticed that the owner of the fig tree would wake up early every morning and start harvesting the figs. In other words, just as they were sitting down, they noticed that the farmer was there, and he would go try, as unobtrusively as possible and start picking the figs. Okay? Amrin shemahu choshdenu. So they said, you know what? Maybe he suspects that if he doesn't come early to harvest the figs, we'll ganaf the figs. We're going to steal the figs. And maybe that's why he comes so early in the morning when we're just coming to sit down to take the figs. Because normally they thought a farmer doesn't have to wake up so early in the morning to harvest his figs. Let him come in the afternoon to harvest the figs. Like he must be coming because he suspects that if he doesn't come now, we'll start grabbing the figs. So not lofis mikomein. So you know what? We don't want him to feel uncomfortable. You don't want to inconvenience him. Let's switch places. Lemachar as yamari de te'inasa gabon. And Omar Lon, so the next day, the farmer discovers that Rebbe Akiva and his students are missing. He finds them at another tree and he says to them, Morai avchada mitzvah dahaveso nehigin ba'avdin imi mana utani minai. He says, there was one mitzvah that you gave me, and now you're taking that mitzvah away from me. In other words, I got such nachas that great scholars were studying Torah under my tree. Why did you take away that mitzvah from me? In other words, they had totally misinterpreted the reason why the farmer was there early in the morning. So Amrin lay, Amrin an Dilma da'achshadlan. So they said to him, no, we thought that maybe you suspected that we would steal your figs. We didn't want to inconvenience you. So Bitsafra asi moda'a yashon, zarcha alav hachama v'hitlio te'enoseha. So the next morning, he came to them and he said, come, I want to show you something. You see how the sun has already come up and now it's shining in the sky? Take a look at my figs. Because he didn't pick the figs early that morning. And he said, take a look. V'hitliu te'enoseha. And they noticed that all the figs started to become infested with worms. Meaning that what happens is that if you're a fig farmer, you know this. You know that if you don't harvest the ripe figs in the morning, by the time the sun comes up completely, the worms are going to come out and they're going to start boring holes in the figs. So he says that I was picking figs whether you were there or not in the early morning, not because I suspected you, but because that's the way you're supposed to harvest figs. Otherwise, they'll become wormy. Ba'osa Shah Amru, Bal Hata'ena Yodeya Emasai Onasa Shel Ta'ena Lilgot, Vehayalokta. So they said they learned an invaluable lesson. The owner of the fig tree knows the right time to harvest the figs, and he harvests them because before they become wormy. Kacha Kadosh Baruch Hu Yodeya Emasai Onasan Shel Tzadikim L'Salek Min Ha'olam V'Hu Misalkan. Similarly, Hashem knows the right time to remove tzaddikim from this world, to harvest tzaddikim from this world, and He takes them at their right time before they become wormy. Okay, so what does that mean? So if you take a look at footnote number 9, it's a beautiful message. He says, Yesh tzadikim shehakadosh baruch hu yodea bahem shem yamshichu od lichyot yechetu, lachein locham kodem zmanam kishayu adayin b'tzidkatam uvetumatam. There are certain types of righteous people that when Hashem sees that if I don't take them from this world, they might do things that are inappropriate at later stages in their life. Hashem already sees this person has fulfilled their purpose and has done righteous things. Let me take him before he does anything inappropriate. And Hashem knows when it's the right time for a tzaddik to leave the world. Af bebavli muva inyan zeh. He says the Bavli brings this story as well. The Avsham Chazal Amduhu Mimaisa B'Te'ena B'Darshu Me'akasuv Hein B'Kedoshav Lo Yamin. He says, and they learn it out. The Bavli brings an additional pasuk that says that God doesn't fully trust his righteous ones, meaning that if he sees that a righteous person may take a left turn at some point, may take a bad turn at some point in his life, Hashem will take that tzaddik before he goes off. Okay? Now, Amnam Vaday Hu Shelo B'Chol Makom Kayam Klal Zeh. He says, but we know that this doesn't always hold true. Shekain Matzinu B'Yochanan Kohen Gadol Sheshimesh B'Kuhuna Gadol Shmonim Shana Lula Basof Nasa Tzaduki. Because we know a story of a great sage, Yochanan Kohen Gadol, who lived during the Second Temple era, and eventually he served as a Kohen Gadol for 80 years, and then became a Tzaduki. He became a Sadducee. Umitzad Sheni Muva Ma'isa B'Talmid Echad Sheshana Harbe V'Shimesh Talmidei Chachamim Harbe Umeis B'Chatzi Yamav. But we know another story of a student who was extremely dedicated to his Torah studies and to his rebbeim, and he died a young man. V'lo yadu Chachamim Litein Shuva L'Ishto Sheshala Madu Amais. And the Chachamim didn't have an explanation as to why he died. They couldn't tell her. They didn't know for sure whether that was the reason he died, as Hashem must have known that if he would have lived longer, he might have, made a wrong turn. V'lo heshivu l'Hakadosh Baruch Hu lakcho me'ha'olam kodem zmano kedei sheyamas ba'odo tzadik. V'yesh la'osif ma shekasav b'inyan zeh b'yafei kol das enosh katzra mehavin sod Hashem v'chachmas ma'asav. The Medrash also adds that the knowledge of man is very, very limited, and we don't know why some people live long lives and some people live short lives. So it's not that the footnote is just pointing out something that's very important. We cannot say with any level of certainty that if someone dies young, even though he was very righteous, it must be that Hashem took him because if he would have lived longer, he would have taken a wrong turn in his life. You can't infer that. It's just that this is sometimes the way that Hashem's system of justice is. So we're not inferring a fast and steady rule. It's just that this is one of the ways that Hashem behaves in the world.
Rabbi, years ago, there ought to be a sort of a spot that about what the great Tzaddikim are revealing to this world. Because remember Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, who wrote these sort of svarim, and he was really getting into Kabbalistic and a lot of ideas that were coming forward for him, and it was having a big impact in the world. And he died at a very young age, at 49 years old. And,
Yeah, I think, yeah, he was a
there was
young,
a sort of thought that maybe he's revealing things out there that maybe the world wasn't ready for yet.
right, right. That's always possible. We don't know. But I remember that when that happened,
Yeah.
and I remember people suggesting that, and
I remember too.
I think it caused the family pain. I remember I when was in yeshiva with his son. So, for people to conjecture that way, I mean, maybe if it provides comfort to the family, you can say that. But I don't know that we can necessarily, really the point of this footnote is to say you can't necessarily suggest, you could say maybe, who knows, maybe, but we don't know for sure. Um, and it is altogether possible that he was revealing things that the generation wasn't prepared for. Yeah, that's possible.
People make these comments all the time. We don't know anything about these things.
We don't,
So
right.
it's so stupid. Really,
Right.
it's ignorant to say that. He died. I heard it too. No one said to me that the Rebbeinu Shalom took him away because he was revealing too much Yesaidos and Torah. And what are you talking about? What do you know what that has to do?
Right.
He said that about the Ram Chal too. Guy before his birthday.
Yes.
He was going to teach.
Right, right. We know of great tzaddikim who were actually involved in Kabbalah who died young, right? Like the Ramchal as well. Yeah. So this is all true. Okay. Let's just hope that we're not meant to take any wrong turns in life. We should all live long lives. Okay. Okay. Kadimach, Rabbi Bon bar Rabbi Chia. Now the Gemara brings another hesped, that when Rabbi Bon bar Rabbi Chia passed away, all Rabbi Ze'era va'after Iloye. So Rabbi Ze'era came and he offered the following hesped using the pasuk in Koheles, Misuka Shanasa Oved, Ima'at ve'im harbe yochel. So the pasuk says that the sleep of a servant is very sweet. Whether he sleeps a small amount, if he eats a small amount or eats a large amount. What the pasuk is saying, it's contrasting the sleep of a servant with the sleep of his master. That sometimes the servant, you might think, oh, well, he's lower class, he's subservient. What kind of quality of life does he have? So Shlomo HaMelech says, sometimes the servant sleeps much more soundly than the master because he doesn't have to worry about this investment or that problem or this problem. Wealthy people sometimes get sleep worse than lower class people because people of a lower economic class don't have as many worries. That's what Shlomo HaMelech was commenting on. But it says that the sleep of the servant is very sweet regardless of how much he eats during the day. So the simple understanding of the pasuk is so it should have said imat v'im harbe yashen. So it doesn't say in the pasuk that it doesn't matter how much he sleeps. It says it doesn't matter how much he eats, which is strange because if you're giving a metaphor about the sound sleep of a servant, don't tell me it doesn't matter how much he eats. Say the sleep of a servant is sweet no matter how much he sleeps. It's always a sound sleep. So in Ksiv Kan, Ella imat ve'im harbe yochel. It doesn't say that over here, but rather it says it doesn't matter how much he eats. So he says, so what does his eating have anything to do with it? So we have to explain that this pasuk is referring to something deeper, and it's a metaphor. So the word shena, shenas ha'oved, doesn't necessarily refer to sleep, but rather you could learn that shena from the word shinun, like v'shinantam levanecha, that it refers to Torah study. And va'oved, the servant, doesn't refer to a servant, a technical slave, but it refers to someone who is an Eved Hashem, who dedicates his life to the study of Torah. And yochel doesn't refer to eating, but it refers to his consumption of the rewards of Olam Haba. And so you would explain it as follows. And as I'm just reading from the commentary, the Torah study of a person who dedicates his life to study Torah is always very sweet because even if in Ma'at, even if he only learns a little bit, because he hasn't lived out a full life, because he dies young, but nonetheless, harbe yochel. He'll still end up eating a lot of the rewards of the world to come. So you also have to change the comma. Misukasha nasa oved immaat. The Torah study of a servant of God is always very sweet, even if he only studies a limited amount of time because God takes him away. But because im harbe yochel, but he will always eat a lot of reward in the world to come. In other words, the reward of a person who dedicates his life to Torah study will always be great, regardless of how much Torah he ends up actually studying. Lema haya Rebbe Bon beRebbe Chia doimeh. So what was Rebbe Bon like? Apparently Rebbe Bon died as a young man. Lemelech shesochar po'alim harbe. He can be compared to a king who hired many workers. V'haya sham poel echad v'haya mitkasher. So that he had this king discovered that one of his workers was an outstanding worker. He was very dedicated, very diligent. The malachta yoser midai, more than all of the other workers. He was really like he didn't waste a moment, and he was really, really plugging away. Me'asa hamelech nitalo. So what did the king do for this employee? The king took him, v'hayamitayel imo arukos ukitsaros, and he would stroll with this servant like he wanted to spend time with him because he saw how good of a person, how good of an employee this was. So the king actually took him off the production line and spent personal time with him. Leitos erev bo osam poalim litol scharan v'nasan lo scharo imahen mishalim. So when it came time for at the end of the workday, when everyone lined up to get their wages at the end of the day, the king paid this worker as well the full wage for the full day, even though this fellow had not spent the full day working. The king pulled him off the production line to spend personal time with him. V'hayu hapolim misramim va'omrim anu yaganu kol hayom v'zelo yaga ela shtei shos. And the other workers were saying, it's not fair. We spent the whole day schwitzing on the production line, and this guy worked only 2 hours, and then you pulled him away and you started schmoozing with him. He was in the executive offices drinking coffee the whole day. So v'niten lo scharu imanu mishalim. So he should get the full day's wages when he didn't work. So Amr lahen hamelech yaga ze lishtei shos yoser mima shelo yagatem atem kol hayom kula. And the king said, what this worker accomplished in 2 hours is more than you were able to accomplish in an entire day. Kach yaga Rabbi Bon batorah le'esum u'shmona shana. Similarly, Rabbi Bon, who died tragically at 28 years old, he was able to accomplish more in his 28 young years. Mimasha ein talmid vasik yachol lilmod l'mei shana. He accomplished more than what a venerated sage who is very, very careful would have been able to accomplish in 100 years. And therefore, he gets his full schar. What a beautiful tribute to a young person who passes away young. And so now the Gemara brings another story of another hesped. Kad demach Rabbi Simon bar Zevid all Rabbi Laya va'after iluye. So when Rabbi Simon passed away, Rabbi Laya came to offer his hesped, and he said, "Arboim devarim tashmisho shel olam." He says there are 4 elements, 4 types of metal that are so necessary for the utility of the world, meaning there are 4 really vital types of metal. And what are they? They're silver, gold, iron, and copper. Those were the 4 types of metal that he was referring to. And the kulan im avdu yesh lahen chalifim. But if any of them ever get lost, they're replaceable. In other words, nunu, so you lose a few silver coins, you can always replace them. As it says in Eov, ki yesh lakesef motza, umakom lazahav yazoku. He says, as it says in the book of Eov, he says, there's a place where silver can be mined from, umakom lazahav yazoku, and there's a place where you can find gold being manufactured. Barzel may offer yukach, iron can be drawn out of the soil. The even yatzuk nechusha, and there are mountains where you can mine copper from. And therefore, elu im avdu yesh lehen chalifin, and therefore, when those things, if they ever get lost, you can always replace them. Avol talmid chacham shemes, mimei vilanu chalifasa. But when a Torah scholar dies, how can we replace him? Sometimes certain people are irreplaceable. Mimei vilanu tumurasa. Who's going to bring us his replacement? As it says, v'hachachma me'ayin timatzei, ve'ezeh makom bina. As it says in Eov, as it continues in that pasuk, it says, but wisdom from whence can it be found? And where is the place of understanding? V'ne'elma me'enei kol chai. It is hidden from all living people. So there's certain things that simply are commodities like Torah scholars that cannot be replaced. We'll hold it here for today. Have a great day, everyone.